Hello and welcome to Genetimics. My name is Tim. Today I will be reacting to excerpts from a short interview with Dr. Stephen Meyer. Their full interview is linked below. Meyer is the co-founder and senior fellow of the Discovery Institute, or DI, based in Seattle, which is a conservative think tank and the main epicenter of Intelligent Design Creationism. Here's a couple of extracts from the Wedge document, which is the leaked mission statement of the DI. Discovery Institute's Centre for the Renewal of Science and Culture seeks nothing less than the overthrow of materialism and its cultural legacies. The Centre is directed by Discovery Senior Fellow Dr. Stephen Meyer, an Associate Professor of Philosophy at Whitworth College. Dr. Meyer holds a PhD in the History and Philosophy of Science from Cambridge University. The governing goals are to defeat scientific materialism and its destructive moral, cultural and political legacies, and to replace materialistic explanations with the theistic understanding that nature and human beings are created by God. If we view the predominant materialistic science as a giant tree, our strategy is intended to function as a wedge that, while relatively small, can split the trunk when applied at its weakest points. We are building on this momentum, broadening the wedge with a positive scientific alternative to materialistic scientific theories, which has come to be called the theory of intelligent design, or ID. Design theory promises to reverse the stifling dominance of the materialist worldview and to replace it with a science consonant with Christian and theistic convictions. I just want everyone to be on the same page here and to be left under no doubt whatsoever that whenever ID advocates talk about the anonymous intelligent designer, they are actually talking about the Christian God. Why are they trying to keep it anonymous? Well, it's because there have been several attempts to get creationism taught alongside of, or even instead of, evolution in science classes in the US. There have been a number of prominent court cases to date, including McLean versus Arkansas Board of Education in 1982, where a federal judge ruled that creation science is not science and cannot be given equal time with evolution in public school curricula. Edwards versus Aguilar, 1987, the Supreme Court struck down Louisiana's Creationism Act, determining that mandated instruction of creationism in public schools was intended to advance a religious belief, violating the First Amendment, so the separation of church and state. And Kitzmiller versus Dover Area School District in 2005, a federal district court ruled that teaching intelligent design, a rebranded form of creationism, in public school science classes is unconstitutional. This latter case had one prominent witness of the defence listed who failed to show up, one Dr. Stephen Meyer, although a few of his ID colleagues did eventually testify. I've linked to the Wedge document below. Please don't take my word for it. Please read it for yourself. One other sentence that caught my eye this time around was one of the objectives. A PBS show such as Nova, treating intelligent design theory fairly. I think it's only fair, therefore, to also link to the Nova special about the Kitzmiller trial, showing intelligent design getting completely dismantled during a 6-week court case. I thoroughly recommend watching it. This is part of my ongoing series about science denial, the deliberate rejection of well-established scientific evidence or the scientific method, driven by emotional, ideological or economic motives rather than evidence-based reasoning. I hope the ideological motives behind the intelligent design movement are now crystal clear. Intelligent design also deploys pseudoscience, which is a collection of beliefs or practices mistakenly regarded as being based on the scientific method, where pseudoscience confirms and science disconfirms. Intelligent design is a superficially plausible, scientific-sounding Trojan horse for creationism, with two main pseudoscience concepts: specified complexity, which I will be covering today, and irreducible complexity, which I will cover in a future episode. Specified complexity is a masterpiece of carefully crafted logical fallacies, including multiple false equivalencies, equivocation, Texas Sharpshooter, some begging the question, and a false dilemma, along with the usual strawmanning of evolution and arguments from incredulity that are necessary for any creationist arguments to even get in the door.
For the person who sort of thinks it's just biology doing biology, and we're the ones.
Yeah, this objection in a number of ways is that, well, the idea of information is just a metaphor, or we're imputing the presence of information and we're anthropomorphizing. But actually, there's a very specific mathematical definition of the kind of information that's present inside living systems. It's Shannon information plus specificity required for function. And so when you break down what's actually going on, what's going on meets the definition of specified information, or as Leslie Orgel, one of the early or pioneers in origin of life research, termed it specified complexity. People a lot of times will say, well, specified complexity, that's an intelligent design terminology that they invented. No, it came out of origin of life research.
So the first set of false equivalencies to look out for is between the terms information, complexity, and improbability, which are used interchangeably by ID creationists like Meyer. These three terms mean different things and are not automatically interchangeable. We'll have a look at them in a bit more detail later. This is further muddied by deliberate equivocation between the everyday, commonly understood meanings of the words information and complexity, and how these are rigorously defined within information theory. But the way that Orgel used the term specified complexity and the way it gets used by intelligent design advocates, originally outlined by William Dembski, is completely different. Orgel's use is qualitative, and Dembski was attempting to use it quantitatively. It's worth noting that Dembski never published any of his results, at least not in what you would consider to be a mainstream peer-reviewed journal. The way that Dembski defined specified complexity essentially implies design, and the use of the word specified is of course a synonym with the word designed. So when you see ID advocates saying things like specified information or specified complexity implies design, what they're actually saying is designed information implies design, or designed complexity implies design, which is a completely circular argument, entirely begging the question.
Orgel was contrasting crystals that have a repetitive and highly ordered pattern, NaCl, NaCl, redundancy, where you get the same pattern over and over again, with random polymers that perform no function. They've just a series of, say, amino acids that can do nothing, with polymers, biomacromolecules that have the property of specificity of arrangement in order to produce a function. And that's what we call specified complexity. And in our uniform and repeated experience, which is what's present in DNA, what's present in proteins.
I agree that what Orgel called specified complexity is present in DNA.
And in our uniform and repeated experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning, whenever you see specified complexity or specified information would be another way to refer to it, it's always the product of a mind. And so there's a very precise definition of from the information sciences of the type of phenomenon that's present in DNA and in RNA, in proteins. And that phenomenon can be called a specified complex sequence. And when we have specified complexity present in any system where we've known the origin, it's always been the product of intelligence. So this is not something that's being imputed. This is something that's present in the molecule.
So this is just the second of our false equivalences here. This is saying that genetic code is the same as computer code. This is just a restatement of Paley's watchmaker argument. If we find a watch on a beach, we infer that there'll be a watchmaker. If we see a tree, we infer there's going to be a tree maker, and so on and so forth. The argument is computer code has specified complexity and is designed by humans. Genetic code has specified complexity and must therefore also be designed. This is textbook false equivalence. One shared trait between two subjects is assumed to show equivalence, when equivalence is not necessarily the logical result. Specified complexity, as defined by Orgel, is exactly what we'd expect to see in DNA. And again, we could clearly see the false equivalence between information and complexity.
And when the whole of molecular biology is built on teleological language, unavoidable teleological language, we have code, We have text, we have code, we have translation, we have transcription, we have information processing systems. This is the way molecular biologists have to talk to describe what's going on.
Biologists used functional language to describe function in order to make it understandable. That's not really a huge revelation, is it? I mean, we could, if we really wanted to, try to describe everything that's going on in terms of the underlying physics and the interactions of the various subatomic particles, but it would take forever to try and describe biology in those terms. When we say things like this population adapted itself to its environment, we're not imagining a Transformers-like leap off a cliff and sprouting wings. It's very much a shorthand way of describing all the things that are actually going on in the background.
And we're also discovering known computer design patterns in the information processing system of the cell. You have automated error correction. You can watch it happening. We have spell check in the computer. Well, we've got automated error correction in molecular biology.
The structure of DNA was worked out in 1953. COBOL was invented in 1964. Our understandings of biology and computer science have been evolving in parallel ever since. Of course, evolutionary algorithms have been created in order to help solve problems that human designers can't solve. The most famous example being the antenna setup on the ST-5 Deep Space NASA mission.
Information in living systems is not merely a metaphor. It's not a concept that we're imputing onto what's going on in biology. By any reasonable understanding of key definitions of types of information, there is a very important type of information present in the cell, and that is specified information or functional information or specified complexity, where each of these terms means roughly the same thing. A highly improbable sequence, which is in which the parts of the sequence are nevertheless specifically arranged as a condition of performing an independent function. And that is exactly what's going on inside the DNA and the protein, the DNA protein system.
He's essentially just restating the original point here, although it's worth noting that this time we do actually have improbability making its first appearance in the information equals complexity equals improbability false equivalence. So I think it's time to take a closer look at actual genetic code in terms of its complexity. Meyer mentioned Shannon information earlier, and you can use Shannon entropy to measure how complex bits of DNA are. So, for example, large amounts of the genome are extremely repetitive sequences that just repeat over and over and over again, a lot of which has no known function at all. We could essentially look at these regions as having little or no information and low complexity. Only a couple of % of the human genome actually contains coding regions which do the very highly specific job of coding for certain proteins, which are the things that perform all of the functions within the cell. So the highly functional code only makes up a couple of %. 8% of the human genome is leftover ERVs, endogenous retroviral sequences, ancient remnants of old viral infections in our ancestors. Is that also supposed to be some kind of specified complexity? In addition to the functional genes, we also have a lot of pseudogenes in our genome, which get transcribed and even translated into proteins, but which don't actually have a function anymore. So we have examples of genes where we have specificity and complexity that lead to function, and pseudogenes which have specificity and complexity, which is almost indistinguishable, but which don't lead to function. If it's not possible to equate specified complexity with actual function, then how is it helping us in our analysis? To the best of our knowledge at this point, around 75% of the genome isn't really doing very much at all, at least within human beings. And again, this does not speak to particularly efficient design. And underpinning this argument is the strawman that evolution somehow can't explain complexity or information. But like we've just talked about, these things are very difficult to define, especially in terms of end function. And associated with this is now an argument from incredulity. We've introduced improbability. I can't see how evolution could produce that level of complexity. Therefore, it must be designed. And talking about the improbability argument, this also works off another straw man, which is that evolution is working towards some kind of exact target. Evolution doesn't have any targets. This is a straw man. So when we look at the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy, or the improbability, it's extremely improbable that evolution could produce that exact target sequence. But evolution is not necessarily aiming for that exact target sequence. Evolution will just favour any sequence that will help to meet that particular function. The other way of looking at this kind of argument is to look at a lottery. It's highly unlikely that I will win the lottery, but it's quite likely that somebody will win the lottery each week. There's also a false dilemma lurking under here, which is it's very improbable that chance alone could reach this particular sequence. But of course, evolution is not a chance-only process. Natural selection, by its very definition, is the opposite of a chance-only process. It's quite specifically the non-random survival and reproduction of those individuals who are best fit to their environment.
Carbohydrates, for example, have arguably more information stored in them than do nucleic acids, the famous DNA and DNA and RNA molecules.
So this is how we can tell that you don't know any biology without you having to say, I don't know any biology.
It's interesting to see, first of all, how easily people will accept something like that. And secondly, how weak the arguments are on the other side when you get into the science.
This is just outright science denial, as we talked about at the beginning of the video. The amount of evidence underpinning evolution is truly extraordinary.
This is my Wikipedia page claims that I'm a pseudoscientist. And so, well, fair enough, call me what you will, but there is no science in the video like what you just showed. And the scientific problems with that are legion, and our team knows them very well. And it's one of the reasons that we think intelligent design is actually part of the story.
Yes, you're a pseudoscientist. No, the scientific problems are not legion. No, your team does not know them well. And no, intelligent design is not part of the picture.
Because we know from, again, our uniform and repeated experience that whenever we see information and we trace it back to its source, we always come to a mind, not a material process. Whether it's digital code in a software or a paragraph in a book, or the information we're transmitting right now, or information in a radio signal, or a hieroglyphic inscription. Information is a hallmark of mind, and you cannot build life without it. And that is, I think, clue one that life was designed by a master programmer.
This is just the same false equivalence stated again. It's just Paley's watchmaker argument once more. Yes, human-designed things contain information. Yes, living systems contain information. But living organisms have a metabolism, and they grow and they reproduce, none of which applies to human-designed information systems. Again, one shared trait, information, between two subjects is assumed to show equivalence, when equivalence is not necessarily the logical result.
You brought up your Wikipedia page and sort of the pseudoscientific accusation. And obviously all that really is, we talked about this on our last podcast, is just a pre-commitment to methodological naturalism, right? But I want people to really understand how silly that is to say, like, if you could just help walk someone through that. If you're seeing all kinds of evidence pointing in a particular direction, but you've decided at the front, we're going to call that evidence, we're going to call that a God of the gaps if it points us there. We're just going to say, no matter what, it's a gap because we said so. It's a gap because we set the parameters on the outset. So now anything that points there, we're calling a God of the gaps, rather than, wait a second, there's just all kinds of evidence pointing in the direction of intelligent design. If you just don't start with the firmly held belief that there is no God, we know that's true. We know that there's no God, so therefore we call it a God of the gaps argument any time that something points us in that direction. Like, can you just help walk?
Let's break it down, and we'll start with that big hairy term that you threw out there: methodological naturalism or methodological materialism.
I love how we're ripping the Band-Aid off here. So no longer are we talking about intelligent design or intelligent designer. No, we're talking about God of the gaps. But that was it. Meyer wasn't given any chance to react to that. We just cut straight to an outtake from the upcoming movie Naturalism is a somewhat broader position than materialism, and it says that only natural laws and forces, as opposed to supernatural ones, operate in the universe. And when doing science, and I do agree that this is one of the underpinnings of successful science, is the use of a methodological naturalism, which is that naturalism should be assumed in one's working methods. This is done purely for practical purposes, because if we can't observe or measure something, then we can't study it. Science needs to make testable, falsifiable predictions. This is how science moves forward. And then by testing your prediction and falsifying it or not, we are able to continually add to the body of scientific knowledge that we currently have. This is why intelligent design is pseudoscience rather than science, because it doesn't make any testable or falsifiable predictions. It's not scientists who are putting God in the gaps. If scientists don't know the answer to a question, what we'll say is, we don't know. In fact, I would argue that we don't know is the starting point for all science. In the case of specified complexity, as defined originally by Orgel, we do know. We do know how that happened. It came about through the long process of gradual change that we call evolution. Anyway, I hope you like this kind of thing. If you do, then please let me know in the comments below. Do the usual, like and subscribe if you want to see more from me. Thanks very much for joining me, and I'll see you again next time.